Okay, this is another episode of Talk to Thorin, and my guest for this one is going to be DeKay, a well-known journalist within the esports space, particularly CSGO, but he has also been branching out recently into League of Legends, for example. And let's just start kind of around the beginning of when people start to know you in Counter-Strike for doing journalism, particularly obviously specializing in investigative reporting. Because the context of how you came up is a story that I'm sure people know the basics of now, but seems to have been forgotten in as much as when I describe the sentiment of how you came up, this is where I'm a bit confused with kind of the current rep that you have in Counter-Strike. So first and foremost, as a premise for people who don't necessarily understand the role of people who are critics on Reddit, I'll tell you this. I always say this kind of number breakdown ratio, because if you ever go, and all you need to do is do two things, okay? You look at the total number of views. So on a video, it's easy because it's public information, on a YouTube video. And then you look at how many comments total there are on the Reddit thread. And then of the comments on the Reddit thread, this is where the last part of this premise takes place that no one else does, because people who are normal people aren't nutters, so they wouldn't stop and do this. But if you work in esports, this will help your sanity. What you do is, let's say you put out a video. So let's say one of my Thorin's thoughts gets, let's just say an average 20,000 views, okay? And then let's say on the Reddit thread, I mean, admittedly, they don't often go that crazy with the comments on those, some of them are fairly straightforward. But let's say it was a good thread that had 50 comments in. Of the 50 comments, let's say we could somehow rate the comments on like a scale of not just like, whether the person was displeased or whether they liked it or just on whether or not they're sort of like critical in a very negative way and direct it like to my person or my character or something like that. If I was to rate those comments like, 1 to 10, the number of comments that would be like 1 to 5, so like fairly negative. If you ever used RES, Reddit Enhancement Suite, and tagged those people, you would soon find out the really negative comments like that maybe come from, I'm not exaggerating, maybe like 20 people. Like if you could somehow just block or ignore these 20 people, which you can with Reddit Enhancement Suite, you would soon find this is like actually most of the audience doesn't actually comment. The ones that comment very negatively, it just seems like there's more people because first of all, the ones who comment negatively don't just put one comment. They will repeatedly comment on the same topic. They will bring discussions up as though they weren't the same person who just commented last time. Sometimes they'll even pretend as though they've just discovered this person they don't like. There's like a very quite disturbing almost kind of vitriol that some of these people will have and so the reason I bring this up is because I know when people are newer content creators, it's one of the things that's very discouraging for them, or even worse, if they get bothered by it and they're a kind of person who I would just describe as a kind of nice, naive, innocent person who hasn't ever experienced like really hardcore online criticism. They might even naively think, I better just change whatever I'm doing so that these people like what I'm doing, because they naively think this is my audience, because they're not thinking of it how I did it with the ratio breakdown, where I've kind of shown it's fairly insignificant and in fact might go counter to the majority of the audience. Instead, they think, it's 50 Reddit comments and 20 of them were really bad and the others were kind of okay. So I guess I better focus on this is the ones that the really strong ones. So the reason I'm bringing all this up, okay, is when you came into CSGO reporting, it was nothing like this. What happened? The very, very brief version goes like this. At the time, there wasn't really anyone who did news in terms of like just reporting the current goings on in the news. So think about how we consume news in the old context. You sit down at 6 p.m. every day, you watch a guy who tells you, here's what happened today, and over on Wall Street there was this, and in sports news, and the big meeting coming up next for the government, and they give you the basic rundown. The whole point is, it doesn't matter how in-depth it is, doesn't matter if that guy actually broke the story or whatever. Well, basically, there was a guy whose niche was, he was doing that for CS. And you know what? I don't really know the guy. I didn't really watch many of the episodes. Some of them seemed fairly light on details, But then again, as I say, that's kind of the role. If you're going to do like an all-purpose news thing, it's actually going to be very difficult to be really in-depth. And I know personally that having been asked in the past to be involved in similar daily shows or people who wanted to set them up, I actually think that it's very time-consuming for what you get back from it. So what happened was this guy, when he was making these videos, you know, he had his audience, and obviously there was a lot of casual fans on YouTube who probably play the game and know a little bit about esports. I'm thinking mainly of the people who watch maybe just the major or something, you know, and they just want to know, oh, what is going on with Fnatic? Oh, I heard Nip might be changing a play. You know, they want to know the basics, and he was filling that niche. The problem was, for some reason, I mean, it's because he's a YouTuber, he was also trying to simultaneously be the news guy, but then cater to sort of a gossip component, you know, which is where it doesn't really work. Like, Walter Cronkite never just gave you the fucking news and then was like, P.S. Kim Kardashian's ass is massive. Think she's had injections in it? What a bitch. You know, he never sort of did that. So the problem was, while I don't say that that's the wrong approach, because his channel was successful, he was trying to sort of straddle two positions, one of which requires credibility and one of which sort of explicitly doesn't. And so his flaw was, he got into some drama with Mo, the famed brief, sometime would-be cheater, and no, obviously someone who used to be a professional player back in Source, and on some capacity he was like a semi-pro player in CSGO, but was more known now with success as a streamer, and bizarrely went down a route where he actually used his platform as a journalist to attack Mo, but on the grounds of something that really had nothing to do with the public, which is the notion that he implied Mo was actually cheating on his future wife. At the time, I think it was his fiance. And his evidence, when he then revealed all this after making a big, you know, furore about it, was so flimsy and beyond, it wasn't even circumstantial, it was almost clearly like fraudulent, you know, to where if he actually believed it, then he was just sort of like a naive idiot who was unfortunately doing harm. And it seemed more likely he might have even known this is somewhat bullshit and he was sort of piecing it together. I mean, I realize now it just sounds like, nah, Thorin, I don't know if you noticed this, but all Western media now, in fact, constructs exactly that, called fake news. But believe it or not, this was actually a new principle for us at the time. So the point I'm getting to was, even though it was Mo, and even though Mo has been at times a scumbag in his own way, this was unfair, and it was out of order the way the guy did it. And so there wasn't just backlash, like, don't do this anymore. As people I want to, there was a kind of a hate train against the guy where people were actually like, you know what, I'm totally out on this. Like, fuck this guy entirely. And then the timing just so happened that you were one of these people. And you were someone who'd done a little bit of video content, the odd piece, you know, and you came along with your videos and you kind of decided to say, I'm actually someone where I'm kind of in a unique position because I have a job outside esports, a job I like to do that pays well, etc. So I don't need like any financial incentive, but I'm also kind of like quite a thorough guy and I'm someone who actually cares about this topic. So I'm going to actually start doing this sort of journalism, but I'm kind of going to do it more in line with, as, I mean, obviously you couldn't say this because this is like, I'm making a hypothetical version, but the way Thorin was talking earlier about what the news could or should be. You started to create the content. So the point I'm getting at here is when you first started out, you actually had you were kind of like the people's champion, you know, you had the groundswell of people who were like, cool, there's a guy who wants to do what we want, you know, there's a niche we want to be filled, but actually we really love this background that he doesn't necessarily have to do it for the clicks. Like at the time, no one would think to say, we should do it for clicks, because you even said like, you know, you're some sort of aerospace engineer and that you weren't even going to quit your job, but you wanted to do it for good reasons. Like you agreed also it was kind of unacceptable behavior the way this guy had done it. So let's just start there. When you first came in, you really did have you had like, to use the analogy from politics, you had like a really high approval rating, right? Wasn't that the way it felt when you came into the scene?
Oh yeah, it definitely felt that way. Like I was almost scared of it, and the first person that I essentially tried to talk to and was able to talk to was Richard about it, because yes. I knew that this is like a very unique position to be in. Like I kind of could tell ahead of time where I had put myself or where I had ended up. And I asked him, I said, like, how do I not mess this up? And what advice can you give me as someone who's had a lot of experience in this? And his first thing that he told me was, like, all this stuff that people think about you now, they're going to forget in a month or 2 months. It's only going to last so long. So sure, enjoy it, take advantage of it. But if you're going to continue doing this, you're not going to be remembered for the guy who wrecked that kid or, you know, emerged from the wreckage of what he did. Everyone's going to forget about that, and they're just going to remember you for your latest report, your latest video, whatever it might be that people are talking about. So yeah, it felt like there was zero. I couldn't do anything wrong at that point. That's definitely how it felt.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of kind of points on that topic is like, first of all, funnily enough, I mean, I realize a lot of people don't think he's very astute or shrewd in the industry, but there's actually something where Travis Gafford actually had a great line where he called it, I mean, I'm sure he probably heard this somewhere else, but he's the first person I heard mention this, where it was called the rubber band effect, where the concept was when you had this breakout that was amazing. I mean, I'll tell you something that might blow your mind. This actually happened to me in League of Legends, because in League of Legends, despite having worked in all these other games, when I came into League of Legends, it was just because the first interviews I did had insane reception, because at the time Reddit was still burgeoning in other games, whereas in League of Legends it was the main place, you know. And not only that, but because the game was so huge relative to other games, you could get 10 times the hits even for a piece that didn't go to the top of Reddit, you know. So when the first pieces started to have success, you know, like a lot of people, I followed what was working, and so I did a few more pieces, tried that out. And so cause all I was doing was I was a guy who just appeared out of nowhere doing these long form interviews that were really well researched, even though I even would admit I didn't know the game at all. I had put in a lot of hours. And so I was kind of in a unique skill set where I could, from the ground running, you know, be doing decent quality stuff that people really wanted. And there was a big niche for it. So what happened was, for the first year or so, I never gave an opinion on anything. I never did any other type of content. I just did these interviews. And so because I was hitting the sweet spot, I had an insane approval rating. Like, you know, every thread would be like 95% upvote ratios. That's why whenever morons who don't know about Reddit tell me, oh, you see, once you get past the number of votes, there's this Reddit vote hazing that happens. I know more about Reddit than you do, son. And, you know, in the past I was getting these percentages, and now they're on 70% when I've criticized TSM. I wonder if there could be a correlation, you know. But the point was, when he said this, it was actually a very shrewd point. He said it's the rubber band effect. And basically, it actually goes like this. The better it is early, and the less criticism there is early, and the more perfectly it goes, unfortunately, like, he didn't put this part in, but this is my own observation. What happens is, that's because it is that everyone likes you or no one dislikes you. And the problem is, eventually, as you're kind of mentioning, something happens, something snaps, a moment happens where it all turns against you. And in this particular instance, my actual judgment, in line with the opening of this video, would be that the people who are kind of like, let's just call them the zealots. Like, we won't go too far beyond that for now. They're just people who, for some reason, communicate very, very strongly and in what would be considered a disproportionate or extreme manner about any topic, and kind of get obsessed about things. When those people turn against you, I mean, God forbid the others, the naive people in the middle, you know, who are just thrown every way by whatever whims, then it can go super hard the other way. Like, suddenly you're the big piece of shit ever. And obviously, to tie into what Richard was saying here, it doesn't matter if Richard has been in the scene for over 10 years and done X, Y, Z. This person, if they're a new person or whether they've only been around a few years, everything will be about their current thoughts on this current piece he has published. And so if they think there's a detail that's wrong, or they just don't like the sentiment of it, that's a very famous one in journalism, you know, every aspect is clearly factually true, but they don't want it to be true. So the solution is attack reality, the very concept of reality, rather than the sentiment that this is happening, you know, and sort of accept it. It's that famous thing of, like, you know, the response that people have to whatever it is, tragedy, you know, like the denial and the bargaining. They kind of go through that, but in the Reddit comments, you know, you're obviously there for the first 24 hours. So obviously this all happens, right? Can you kind of pinpoint what it was? Was it just generally that you were breaking stories? And obviously, as anyone who's worked in that field knows, as I kind of pointed out there, eventually you will touch on someone's sore spot. So they might think it's great that you're breaking a roster move about Nip changing a player. Or they might think it's amazing that you've just let them know that 100 Thieves has a new org. But when you get to their team, and either that a player they like has done something wrong, or the org is changing a player, or they're getting a player that they don't want to, suddenly, you know, it breaches that. I always use the analogy of it's a bit like comedy, right? Everyone will say they love stand-up comedy, and everyone will say, oh, I love to just laugh. And yeah, of course you can joke about whatever. But as soon as you get from, like, the joke about the vicar that he's like, ha ha ha, and then you're like, you know the thing about abortion? They're like, no, abortion's no fucking laughing matter. You know, like, as soon as you get on their hot button issue, the problem is they forget it's a joke, don't they? So they go immediately to the extreme, right? Can you kind of pinpoint what it was that turned people?
I didn't notice much. I mean, I'm good at, like, kind of focusing on the good more than the bad when it comes to, like, criticism, or at least unfair criticism. But I would say the biggest thing that I noticed first, and there could have been maybe a person or two before that, but it was mainly when I reported something and then 3 weeks later, something else happened or it didn't happen. That was when people failed to realize how investigative journalism and reporting works. They don't understand that in the real world, things do change. People change their mind when we're dealing with a community that is essentially a lot of young individuals, they're professional players, but they're still very young and very naive, and things change very, very quickly. And from the outside, maybe that's harder to see, but that was definitely when it changed. When people didn't understand the fact that just because I reported something at one point doesn't mean that it couldn't change, or all the intricacies that go into that. That was definitely the biggest part.
So a problem that goes along with that, and I can tell you I'm absolutely not in any way someone who has transcended this just because I know the problem exists, In fact, anyone who has ever seen the hashtag FanLogic knows I'm very much mired in this disgusting world, this swamp from which I cannot explicate myself currently, which is that I've always said this, right? One of the problems, and if you notice, especially people who work in either opinion pieces like I do, or investigative journalism, so two sorts of things that people encounter and instantly have a very strong reaction to one way or another, because of how, as I said, very small groups of people, but who are very persistent, who might even give off the impression that they are not indeed a regular hater, something like that. One of the most classic opening lines for people who are hardcore, obsessed haters goes, I'm a really big fan of this person, but, and then everything after that sentence, right, in no way reads like they were ever a fan in any sense. And you sometimes find out that, again, believe it or not, people who are mentally deranged might just lie for their own benefit to seem a certain way. And so the problem with this behavior, DeKay, is even if you tell yourself it's just a small percentage of people, they're just ill-informed, most people are fine with this, because of the very essentially unfair way that these people will treat you and speak about you, and then even build up a whole kind of framework of lies and stories, and essentially they just light a lot of little fires constantly, which if you ever waste your time trying to put out, just saps your energy and just unfortunately makes you seem like you're having a disproportionate response to your fan base, because 99% of people never provoke that reaction. And so I always give this analogy, right, that it's a bit like if anyone ever looks very seriously into some of the very famous conspiracy people who are like conspiracy theorists or trying to get, the truth out or whatever, right? It's a very famous thing that you can absolutely find documents from government agencies where basically government agencies know exactly how to harass those kinds of people, but in such a way that they will not be believed. So what you do is you actually do anonymously go along and you kill their dog, or you go along and you just tear up a load of their mail, or you do something very minor with like like an official piece of information in a record somewhere, and all you're trying to do is set it off so that it causes a little bit of like horrible inconvenience in the person's life, but so that A, they definitely know you did it, or someone did it in response to what they're doing, but B, if anyone hears it, they'll go, oh, that person's just crazy. Like if you go around telling them, oh, the fucking FBI killed my dog, and like someone's going to go, oh, you're mental. Like I can just ignore you, you're an idiot. But I will just say this, okay, and this is what I want to kind of take on. It is almost 100% right. If you look at our industry, at people who do either, like I say, very strong opinion pieces or investigative journalism, they all will have these moments where they seem to freak out or to have an axe to grind or a chip on their shoulder from their own fan base, it sounds like at times, right? How do you deal with that? Because you clearly do have the tweets where you kind of vent a bit, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I try my best to not, because I have learned over time what you alluded to earlier, that Reddit especially is a very, very vocal minority compared to everyone that actually pays attention and consumes your content. That is
it's actually quite mad, isn't it? Like even YouTube, because of how quick it is to comment, you get a lot more YouTube comments than you do Reddit comments. It's amazing how few people comment relative to the overall hits if people knew,
Yeah, that's something that was definitely one of the things that I learned that I've definitely taken away from this whole entire experience so far, is that it's a very, very few vocal minority. And I didn't notice for a very long time on Reddit that it was probably 5 to 10 people who were regularly, adding to that influence of people that would criticize me for things that I didn't feel were fair reasons. I'm perfectly fine with constructive criticism. And I was someone who often and appreciated it if it was constructive, but a lot of times, of course, it's not. So for me, I've tried, for a long time to tell myself to ignore it, but every once in a while, it's sometimes it's too difficult to completely just leave it alone. And I personally do think that I like having that chip on my shoulder. I think personally, if everyone liked everything I did and everyone was just happy with it, it would honestly be boring for me. I do some, I don't enjoy all of it, but I do like the fact that there are some people out there that either have some sort of issue, I don't, whatever it might be, but I just try to keep that to a minimum. I try to keep when I voice my opinion about that to a minimum. So yes, after I had published that the Fnatic players were going to come back together, and everyone denied it, and players at the major denied it and had a problem when and it ended up happening. Yeah, of course I tweeted, doubt me now. But I try to keep it to a minimum, but there's still a part of me that will still always have something to prove, especially when you're dealing with these kind of people on a day-to-day basis. I definitely learned to use things like the mute button on Twitter more. That's fun because the people still think that you even know they exist and you don't. But other than that, I have to constantly remind myself, and it's not as bad as it was before, but it's something that it hasn't really got to me. I think I've been fairly good at dealing with it, but I can absolutely see how that can really affect people, especially in other things that might affect you even more. Like you could talk about talent. I mean, I think it would be much harder for them to deal with the criticism than it is for someone like myself.
Sure. Okay. So let me ask some questions now, which aren't questions that I personally would ask. That I have to now play the role of the naive interviewer, who essentially is an idiot because I have to stand in for the viewer, who is not an idiot in real life necessarily, just they are not informed. So they would ask these questions. Okay. So here's the first question, right? What is the difference between a DeKay report in the process of getting this report and someone who is just in a Skype group or knows a pro player and is told a juicy piece of gossip? What's the difference? Well,
personally with me is just the amount of effort. I mean, it doesn't take much to just be told something and then go and tweet about it. Like there isn't much work involved there. It's all about just being in the right place at the right time or having the right friend. In my situation, I definitely try to keep my working relationship and any friends that I might have in the industry completely separate. When I am, piecing this information together, I can't just take something at face value that either someone anonymously tells me or that someone that I trust tells me. I still have to go through every area I can to try to verify that something's true and that I'm not going to, put myself in a bad situation by essentially reporting something that isn't true. That's the main thing that I've always valued over everything else. And something that I believe helped me at Slingshot too, it's something that they helped instill, is to perfect the process, not necessarily the result. I'm not out there always looking for the biggest thing to report or the thing that I think will get the most views or the most hits or be biggest on Reddit or get the most retweets. It's perfecting the process and making sure that I'm doing things right and accurately. And if that means that I have to, in my opinion, it's not really jeopardizing myself, but to the public, it might seem that way by essentially reporting something like, let's say when I reported Elige that was going to possibly play with some of the banned match fix players, that was a risk for me because I knew there was a high likelihood that it couldn't happen, and it didn't.
Yes.
But to some people, they might think that's jeopardizing yourself. For me, that's not. I'm still reporting something and I'm doing it accurately, but there's definitely a lot more to just either being in a Skype conversation or a Skype group or having just, a friend that's a pro player. There's so much more work and there's a lot more that I have to deal with to make sure that I'm not, misinforming the public.
So a bizarre detail that's connected to exactly that premise I set up there, which obviously is what some naive people think is what you do, that you're just someone who, much like other individuals, gets an information from a Skype group or a person and then just goes, well, shortest route from my brain to everyone else's is Twitter, and then you just do a tweet and nothing else happened on it. Or obviously, by the way, we won't address this one, but the most ludicrous premise is the idea you got it from Reddit, because that's been a very famous one in League of Legends, believe it or not related to you. So I'll use this as an example because it doesn't seem biased then. But in League of Legends, people used to say that Jacob Wolf got all his information from Reddit. Now, what's great about that is, one, the level of self-aggrandizement that these people who were on Reddit give themselves is hilarious. Because two, it's logistically impossible. Like if you ever tracked these stories coming out, They never were out there in the details that people claimed on Reddit first and then came this way. Like, it wasn't, except for the fact that, if you put enough shit against the wall, something might vaguely seem like it. But there was nothing you could ever have taken. As in, if this actually worked, someone could be a TMZ and cynically have done it. It just wouldn't work in esports. I can tell you that for a fact, So getting back from that, the part that it already can tell you that there's something going on beyond surface value when people critique you, as in implying that you get your sources from Reddit or from just Skype groups or from just a piece of gossip, is that if you've noticed, most of the people who reply with the most vitriol and attack you for exactly that simultaneously then turn around and are huge fans and proponents of people who do exactly only what I've just mentioned. It's that what's bizarre about it is, okay, think about when you came in the scene. So when people chose you as an alternative to the person who you kind of like, you encroached on his area of doing the news reporting and doing it on YouTube, etc. It would have been crazy if they'd been like, whoa, like totally misreporting something and abusing your position. This is fucked up. And then they'd gone, but I like this guy. And it was a guy who did exactly the same thing, but continuously and only did that, never even did the other stuff. You'd go, well, that's a bit weird. Like, do you actually like that? Are you actually against this guy? How do you take that? Because that's one of the parts that's kind of crazy. Because again, on the surface, people might think you're wigging out against criticism. Like, no, people just don't understand the method. But they're literally, it seems like the people who are the most against you and make the per sources not just a joke, but an attack on you, literally are big fans and proponents of other people in the scene who only do, essentially, the shittiest non-journalism simulacrum that you could get, right? Does that get to you at all?
I mean, it has. I would say I'm definitely a lot better at dealing with it now. A little bit of it is receded, but I definitely can handle it a lot better than I could before. The main thing is just I've come to learn that a large majority of people who consume esports content and are vocal about it on the internet are largely either misinformed about almost everything that they think they know, or they're just, what I assume is very young and just don't understand how things work in real life, sure, or how businesses run, or how just essentially how things work. And so I always thought, well, I don't want to always be tooting my own horn and saying, oh, stop giving me crap. You just don't understand how this works, because I've only been doing this for so long. So I didn't feel like it was the right thing to do for me to be vocal about the criticism that was given to me. So I tried to just keep my head down and just keep improving and doing my job and doing what I enjoy doing. But yeah, it is a large majority of those people are the ones that they think that I'm not a journalist just because what they envision is that I'm just taking what someone tells me in a Twitter DM and I'm just putting that on a piece of paper and adding some additional details to it. When in reality, they don't understand that I could be working on something or verifying information or searching and trying to find out anything I can about a specific topic for maybe a month and end up not finding enough leads, and I have to just leave it and I'll never ever get to publish anything about it. That's happened multiple times. They don't see the behind the scenes things, and I'm not saying that these people should automatically know that, but that doesn't give them the right also to criticize me for not being a journalist just because they don't see what I do on the inside. I think there's definitely not enough give and take from there, but I'm a lot better at dealing with it, and for the most part I ignore it.
Sure.
Now,
so as I said, the premise of how you came into doing the journalism, where you still had your full-time job elsewhere in a lucrative industry, which is far more lucrative and with career opportunities than doing reports about Counter-Strike rosters. I can tell anyone who knows the metrics, When you came in, what was great was I actually thought that also contributed to you having like essentially one of the most perfect sort of entries to the scene, where you had a skill set already, people liked and wanted your stuff, but without any kind of, when people start out as beginners and they have to learn the ropes, they make a lot of mistakes along the way, which is part of what unfortunately contributes to people disliking them. For example, it's happened to Jacob Wolf, I know, where he made a few slip-ups and missteps early on, and hence those for haters will always haunt him. That'll be what they'll harp on again, and they'll keep going back to. Imagine that, bringing up old stuff again and again. So the point I'm going to get to is this, right? One of the reasons why I said when he first came in, I thought, wow, this person actually has the perfect entry, is because first of all, you had kind of skin in the game. Like, you were showing people that I'm not doing it just for money, actually. That's not the main motivator here. So, in theory, you would think people couldn't go with that angle of, it's just for clicks, etc. But as I learned a long time ago on the internet, people who are haters, there's a very simple way of thinking about it, is that you'd like to think that there were people who had very strong values or opinions, and when you had counter ones, that they just ideologically and on a logical level disagree with you, right? Because that's how they would present it themselves when they say they disagree. In reality, my own observation has been that these are people who emotionally react and do not like you for some reason. Something about you ticks them off. And what they actually do is they then, on a day-to-day basis, reverse engineer a reason as to why they would logically be allowed to feel that way. And the reason I say this, and it's a very kind of subtle point, is because if you ever see when they're not just commenting themselves, but they're like telling someone else what you've done, they always have to lie. And the reason they have to lie is a very logical one, which is because they don't have a very sound logical reason as to why someone else that doesn't know you and currently doesn't dislike you would think you are a piece of shit or a terrible human. So what they have to do is, again, use the same process, but for someone else. They have to think, what could I say about this person that would make this other guy who doesn't seem to dislike him hate him and have the same feeling I do? And so, unfortunately, to create that in the short term typically means they have to say something like, oh, he was wrong about all these things and he lied about this, and and he actually said this before, but then he deleted it. Like, that's a classic one. What they'll do is they'll use evidence that doesn't exist as evidence. Like, they'll say, oh, it was all deleted. Oh, where is it now? I'm not going to look through 700 hours of, like, they always have a perfect alibi in that sense. And the point is, what they're relying upon, quite intelligently in a sense, is that no one else is going to waste their time looking at this. They're just going to go, they're going to unfortunately use that naive logic of, well, no smoke without fire, which if you just rephrase it for the internet generation doesn't work. Well, some moron wouldn't just make up lies on the internet, like that doesn't sound the same, that one, does it? It sounds like actually like the opposite likelihood. So the point I'm getting at here is, when these people do this, yeah, you might actually look at it and say, oh, well, that's not reasonable. But now, unfortunately, you have made money from journalism. And what's more, obviously, you have carved out a niche and you have gotten your own reputation. So to the hater, even though they never could have initially said, you just do it for money, now they could say, he does it for some money, especially if, as you're saying, they don't know the way the industry works. They imagine you're getting a lot more than you are. And then secondly, they can also, even if they don't like that, another key thing about a hater is, it reminds me of this joke that I remember. I think it was either Bill Burr or Doug Stanhope had in like the mid-2000s, when people were first starting all this like student activism, where, people who'd only been in college for a year suddenly were incredibly passionate about the fact that this person shouldn't be allowed, like freedom of speech, and pretended as though they were a 40-year tenured, like political science professor who knew that this was the true threat our nation faced. And his joke was that generation were just stood at the back of a hall with a blank picket sign and a Sharpie pen waiting for something to get offended by. It's not that they had something in the first place, they just picked it up that. So in this scenario, I feel like a lot of the people are doing that. And so even if you could prove that to this day you'd never made a cent from journalism, they'd go, but then he just did it to get attention. He just wanted to be someone, They'll always have a reason, remember, that leads into the same feeling, which the feeling should be people should have contempt for you, and that in some way, whatever you're doing isn't really worthwhile because it's counteracted by all these negative ulterior motives, right? Is there an element to which you still are the person who isn't part of the scene? Do you still, because you kind of alluded as though you kind of feel a little bit like that, like, are you like fully a journalist in the scene now and that's entirely how, do you still think of yourself as like, I'm doing it for a reason, like it was to set things straight, or there isn't anyone else with this skill set, or I'm just ideally suited and it's fun to do on the side? Because obviously you did for Slingshot do it as some kind of an income, and I know at one point in time, tragically, unfortunately, just before Slingshot kind of capsized, you were actually going to pivot into doing it full time, or you were going to give it a go and see how it went for 6 months, a year. So what's the current status and the trajectory in that sense?
Well, I still think of myself the same. It still feels the same. I mean, the reason why I decided, after making those first couple of videos to just keep doing this and keep improving and learning is because I do enjoy it. Like if it meant that I made zero, I would probably still do it. The only reason why I do look for either pay for who I work with or that I look to be compensated in some way is just because of the other skills I have and the other full-time work I do. If I'm going to take time away from that, I'm not, even though I enjoy it, I don't think it's worth my time to do it for free when I could be improving in other areas. But I'm still that same person for sure, and I still have those same aspirations regardless of the situation. And I never did it completely full time, but I definitely, I would say it's not 50-50, but I definitely spend probably a third of my time in esports or paying attention to Counter-Strike and doing work in Counter-Strike. So I'm still that same individual. I still look at it the same way, and it's the way I plan on doing it. I mean, right now it's kind of weird because I am independent, so that's definitely been something new. But I would say the biggest thing that helped and that helped me stay, focused and on the actual job at hand was the people at Slingshot. I actually think I was very fortunate to be put in that situation, especially when you look around at some of the other situations that people have been in where they sign, like say take Launders, for example, goes to a place like Yahoo and then ends up shutting down right away. Thankfully, I got the year that I did with them, who are actually people who are very knowledgeable in the scene. So I guess I consider myself fortunate that I had people like Richard and like those guys who could kind of help me improve and learn the things that I didn't know and still stay focused. And also, I just think my general, I don't know if it's passion or whatever, but just how much I like Counter-Strike and always have, that's always been prevalent, and that definitely has helped. If I wasn't a fan of the game, that's why I've been so hesitant to go to other areas like League of Legends. I still feel hesitant to do anything like that because it feels a little bit disingenuous if I'm not a true fan of the game, or if I don't appreciate the game. It doesn't feel the same to me. So that definitely is a lot of the reason why.
Okay, to tie back into the earlier topic about people who are just reporting rumors, like for example, okay, I don't ever present myself as an investigative journalist. I've done pieces in the early days of my career that obviously no one listening to this would have ever seen, and more recently I've actually done a few pieces. I did a couple of videos where I kind of tied elements of investigative journalism into my op-ed style Thorin's Thoughts videos anyway. So I was already explicitly saying they're my opinions, they're not necessarily all facts, but they absolutely were based in facts. I did a couple of pieces where it was just because I had people in almost like emergency scenarios. It was actually only in the game Overwatch, believe it or not, reach out to me and be like, this is going on, this is abuse. And then typically I used to just always forward that to Richard. But in these particular instances, he's not as deep into Overwatch. I knew some of the people on a personal level, and I thought, I actually have the skills here. I can do it. I know the journalistic ethics and the process. I'll carry it out. I'll do it, etc. But obviously, I'm not really ever presenting myself as an investigative journalist. So if I was myself to do a tweet right now, like, maybe Twist will join Optic, that would be a tweet which, because of who I am, might go onto Reddit. And on Reddit, as soon as it is a Reddit thread, it is essentially being treated on Reddit, and in terms of traffic, the same way as a report by you, which is a fully written report with all the information and unnamed sources, but some inside info and maybe some sort of context to it. Suddenly it's being treated the same way, right? Is it frustrating that either A, that sort of content basically competes with or takes away spotlight from what you're doing, maybe on the same topic, but you're doing a real journalistic report, and B, is there frustration from the fact that, in theory, when you are doing all the due diligence on these stories, all of them should live and die based purely on the popularity of the story. It should be nothing to do with you and who you are, etc. So in theory, most of these reports should just whip right up to the top of Reddit. I mean, it's all news, remember, that people want. Like, that's one of the most infuriating parts about criticism, is even the people who say that it's all shit and it's all from Reddit and blah, 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 they want to read and know these pieces of information. Everyone does. That's the weird part about it. But it is very fickle as to what the success can be like, right? So what do you think of those two aspects? How do you deal with it?
Well, with the tweet thing, the first thing that comes to my head, I don't know if it's just, I guess I'm somewhat of a competitor. If I see somebody tweet something in my head, I'm thinking, well, I should have been able to put the pieces of the puzzle together and have reported this before they tweeted that. I almost look at that as a slight on myself, that I'm not working hard enough, or that I'm not searching the right areas or putting myself in the right position so that I'm the one who is reporting beforehand. But ultimately, I'm still a fan of the game. It's still information I want to hear, so I would rather it be there than not. Yeah, I'm obviously, if let's say there was another person doing the same job as me and they report something before me, I'm still glad it's there than not. Of course, the competitor inside me just thinks, I wish that was me every single time. So it can be a little difficult to deal with, but I more put that as a slight on myself rather than have any sort of animosity towards, someone who just decides to say something that they've heard or whatever it might be. So for the most part, that part doesn't bother me. But what was the second part of the question? Sorry.
The second part was the fact that, there isn't like a rhyme or reason necessary to, for example, Reddit's success, and obviously in the modern day, especially unfortunately in esports, because actually, unlike people like me, most people haven't been able to build up social media channels. It actually takes a long time and a lot of diligent work, and perhaps even some sort of like bizarre understanding of manipulating media. I mean, this is actually, as a sidebar, the whole thing with Donald Trump, which is hilarious, because most critics of Donald Trump will say, why does he tweet? He's ruining everything. It's like, that's the whole reason you can even now have this conversation about him being in this position and then tweeting, because if he hadn't have done that, he would have never captured your imagination. Hence why you are now talking about his tweets. Like, I always give this analogy, okay? I know so many people, right, who the first thing they say to me, and something that they will just bring up in passing conversation, apropos of nothing, is, why do you buy Yeezys? They don't even look good. What the fuck are Yeezys? Yeezys aren't even good. And I go, you know why I do it? You just said it right there, because no one else has a conversation out of nowhere about someone's shoes. No one starts going, I hate this kind of shoe. So it has instantly succeeded on all the levels that someone might want to have a shoe. Beyond the pale, it's actually ridiculous the counter reaction is forced from you and the attention in a sense. So in that respect, right, when we're talking about this kind of phenomenon, where did I start there? I got confused for a second.
Donald Trump.
What was it before that though?
Something to do with Reddit and the reaction.
Oh, that's right. Yes, I forgot. I was just repeating a question actually. Yes. So the point I was getting at was, you would think logically, right, well, this is about a big team and it's a big piece and people want to know this info, so this should be top of Reddit. Right? Sometimes won't even break the front page. Meanwhile, other times, this is a throwaway detail. For some reason, the haters didn't catch on early enough. Boom, top 5 on Reddit, but this was actually a smaller piece I did, How do you deal with that? Because in your business, by how hot the story is, you'd hope, right, I've got a fucking front page story here,
Yeah, it's that part is definitely one of the largest things that I've struggled with mentally, because some of the pieces that take the most work and take the most time and the most research, everything combined, will often, no one will see it. No one will even realize, or after it's published, someone will mention it somewhere because they read it, but then when that's tweeted, someone will tweet something that I reported, they'll tweet it 2 weeks later, but they'll just say it as in it's public information because they read my report, but no one else saw it on Reddit, so they'll treat it as if it's new news. That does definitely get to me, especially if it's something I've put a lot of time into. And it's just the way it kind of works with Reddit and the casual fan is they want to see a roster move is such a big deal to them. But if a player from a team 2 years ago didn't get paid $5,000, they want the player to get paid, but they don't really care. And sometimes those are the stories. So that I would say is just about the most difficult challenge, not the negative feedback, none of that. It's the time put in versus somewhat of the reward, because in my opinion, as long as I'm publishing it, that's the reward. As long as I'm publishing it and doing the job or exposing something or just, putting things out in public interest, that's the reward to me for the most part. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't care if a story was on the front page of Reddit or not. You definitely, it's some sort of an accomplishment, some sort of an achievement. So yeah, that's the number one thing that I've had the hardest time with, is when I will put the most time into something that gets no attention. And that's the hardest thing to deal with.
So one thing I know will always rankle and really bother investigative journalists is it's already enough that there are people with no inside information who will just objectively say, this is a lie. this information is false, either because they don't want it to be or they don't like you. That's one thing, right? You can deal with that. There is at least a rationale to that you can learn, and you can understand what to look out for, the warning signs. But one thing no one can be prepared for is the very simple fact that beyond basic details, whenever it comes to aspects, so for example, while it will be a fact that this team is considering removing a player and perhaps they're trying this player out, unfortunately, tied into that come all these subjective judgments that we have a hard time teasing apart. Like, for example, does that mean they think this player wasn't good? And, I didn't think they'd sign that player. He didn't seem to, the ties in all these facts, which is basically just what our brain tells us sort of as commentary as we read the fact. And often we mistake that for the fact. And unfortunately, what this leads to is people within the industry, sometimes within the situation itself that's playing out, who themselves will seem to counter that information or themselves say it is a lie or it is wrong or it's somehow like jumping the gun. And it's not, right? Some of them are just scumbags. So famously, Richard has had a problem with this, where actually the owners of teams would directly or through other journalists put out information that he had just lied completely. It was not true. And sometimes they did it knowingly, sometimes actually for gamesmanship, believe it or not, to further their end within a negotiation. And so that's obviously very frustrating, because then it leads to like an official credible source implying you're a liar. But even worse, I think actually the most criminal offenders are the ones who they naively are telling what they think is the truth. They just don't know it is their truth. If anyone has ever seen the classic black and white movie by Akira Kurosawa called Rashomon, that is basically how every story in basically human relationships plays out, where what happens is there's an event and there are a few facts, but the way those facts are shaped and the way they are reported and remembered by other people can differ so wildly that if you lined all the people up, you'd have a very hard time, unless you're a detective, getting to the bottom of what actually happened. And especially as a naive outsider, you would end up thinking, this can't be true, because the problem is these two people clearly are telling me the truth. I can tell that they're earnest, but they're telling me things that are totally mutually exclusive, So does that bother you, that there'll be players or other people in the scene who are like, that's not true, because, their friend is someone who said something different, or he hasn't got that information, or even worse, it goes counter to something that might be in their favor. Therefore, they have their own sort of natural emotional reason to imply it's fault. Does that fuck with you a bit? Because they do kind of short circuit things, right?
Yeah, that does. That's as far as negative feedback from the community can go. The people who can sway the public the most are people with that kind of power.
Put it this way, I could do it, right? Like if I for some reason disliked you and I could come out and be like, he's full of shit. Like I know that guy for years. You'd never do that. And yes, listen, not everyone would, but there would be a certain amount of people who, as a result, would fuck with you because of it, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's the thing. People don't realize the power that they have, and not that I think anyone should, when they're tweeting or when they're saying something in public, I don't expect everyone to predict what they say who it might have an impact on, because that would just be ridiculous to expect every person to do that and predict, and they shouldn't be responsible for their own fans. But it can definitely be a bit difficult, because all it can take is one word of wrong or whatever. I've had different pros or different figures in the community to just say wrong, or you're wrong, or that was wrong, when they actually have no idea about the situation at all, even if they are friends with the person or not.
To give you a piece of context, I've actually had it happen, right, where a pro player teammate has said something like, that's a lie, that's not true, and literally I know, because my source is the player himself, who is their teammate, who has directly told me, this is what I'm doing, this is what I think. And when I obviously don't publicly say that, I say something like, what if this was that, the person's like, that's a lie. It's like, I can factually prove that you know less about the situation than I do,
Yeah, exactly. And there are times where someone will say that, and it's not like I would be doing the wrong thing if I were to go to that pro privately and say, I know you just tweeted that I'm wrong, but here's how I know that I'm right. I can't just go and show them my information. That would be jeopardizing
that's
the
obviously
source.
Unfortunately, the one thing you cannot do, this is also something infuriating for people who are listening, is that if we were just powerless, right, then that would be very frustrating. But you'd accept that. You'd go, well, I'm powerless, nothing I can do. No, we have a gun that could kill our enemy instantly. We have the facts and all the evidence, right? But within the very context, and by the way, the enemy's very aware of this, we cannot ever use that gun, because to do so, it's like we have to shoot through someone who's an innocent in the story. So we can't do that because it kills them. So in a way, we have to suffer the slings and arrows of this outrageous fortune, because that is the situation we're in.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, to add to the point, another big criticism that people have of mine, other than people thinking that I'm wrong or I get things from Reddit or HLTV or whatever it is people saying, oh, real impressive. This guy's a fantastic journalist if he's reporting things an hour before the organization does, when I will actually have people send me logs of these people from the organization saying, can we hurry up and get an announcement together because he just reported this. We need to try to get this out as soon as possible. And then they'll do it when they weren't even ready to. They weren't even prepared. And they're just doing it to try to make sure before it gets too high on Reddit, they can make their announcement or whatever on Twitter. So people don't, and I can't just say, well, guess what? I have a chat log right here that shows that they didn't plan on doing it. I have to bite my tongue. So that, yes, that's another significant challenge that you have to deal with.
Okay, so then as to kind of come towards the end now, to circle towards the end, right? As I alluded to before, just before Slingshot went down, because actually, if anyone knows the details of that, it's actually quite, it basically is how it appeared on the surface, which is that they came out and they were like, we're having problems funding it, we're going to do this Patreon approach, and then because it just went so, it just never got going with the Patreon, they literally did just end it. Like, this is all the way it went behind the scenes as well. There wasn't like a long drawn out process of like, it very quickly did fall apart. Since it did kind of coincide and overlap with you saying, like, I'm going to actually try taking some time off work and see if I can do this full time and see where it goes, the timing's obviously bad. Now, with that said, you've already said in this chat here that you might still do it if you made nothing, if you're in a position where you couldn't make any income, etc. But what is the current kind of like trajectory right now for you? Like, are you still in the position where you're trying to keep it going independent? Are you going to just give that a certain period of time and see how it goes? Are you maybe going to go back to your previous position and do it part-time and then go back to your job? What's the current situation?
Well, the current situation, I still do things kind of like on a contract basis when it comes to my full-time work. So it's, I kind of have the freedom to increase the workload or reduce it somewhat easily. But when it comes to being independent, it isn't more so if I want to be independent or not. It's just the struggle has been, and it's something that I didn't necessarily overlook at Slingshot, but Slingshot was very unique in the fact that there was nothing off limits that I could publish or that I could talk about or that I could do. I didn't have there was no restriction on any of my social, like I was allowed to just be myself, do anything I wanted to do. I could write about anything, I could report on anything, but there unfortunately are a lot of outlets that do have financial ties to other organizations that wouldn't be happy if I found out something bad about them and had to publish it. I don't want to have to pick and choose where I publish my work. So yeah, while a lot of, basically every website under the sun has asked me to write for them, hardly any of those are okay with every single thing that I could possibly publish. And so that's a little bit of the difficulty with it. So I'm not opposed to writing for another outlet again. It has to line up perfectly. And Slingshot just, unfortunately that it ended the way it did it. They were the perfect place for a person like myself to be, because I don't ever want to be told that I can't publish something for who I'm working for. And so that's definitely the biggest challenge when it comes to it. As of right now, I'm just going to kind of continue down the same road of kind of doing both part-time. I mean, I spend a lot of, I think that's something else that people probably don't realize is how much time that I actually do put into everything that I do, including this. It does take a lot of significant time, hours every day that, there's only so many in a day. So it's, for me, I'm going to continue with the independent kinds of stuff and see how that works. But if a prime opportunity came along, I would absolutely take that up and go full time if I wanted to. I enjoy it that much. One of the biggest things that Richard also told me was to get to events. And I actually have had people who come to me and say, if I want to do something similar to you, like, what are your suggestions? And even though I don't really feel I don't feel credible enough to be really giving advice, even though I've kind of made some things work, that is the biggest thing is getting myself to events was one of the best things that I could have done. So I don't have there isn't any reason to not continue doing what I'm doing, because I like it just as much as I ever did before. It's just a matter of being in the right place at the right time, and we'll just see. I guess have to see how it goes.
Hello, this is Neo, just an average CSGO player, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel.